everyone. Welcome to another day in in the nightmare of the second Trump administration. It's Resistance Live. I'm Elizabeth Cronise McLaughlin. If you're new here, I am a former Wall Street lawyer, lifetime activist, and I work now exclusively with people who are trying to grow their leadership to make the biggest impact for positive change possible in the world. And this is Resistance Live for the 30th of July, 2025. Okay. For our visually challenged viewers today, I'm wearing a white knit tank toppy thing. My hair is pulled back. I'm a pink-skinned, green-eyed, dirty, blonde-haired woman, and I'm in front of my bookshelf and my yellow utility cart, as always, coming to you from occupied Muncie, Lenape, and Mohegan Land. Okay. This entire situation with Epstein just gets worse and worse for Trump. And one of the things that I've been thinking about since yesterday is the way in which he just simply can't stop himself from talking about it. The end result of that is that, he's very, very deep in a hole right now, and he just seems to keep digging. The latest manifestation of this was that yesterday on Air Force One, when he was in a press gaggle, he was asked about what it was that had caused the fracture in his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. And he started talking about how employees had been stolen from him at Mar-a-Lago by Epstein himself. He was then asked whether or not Virginia Giuffre, who Trump had employed as a teenager in the spa at Mar-a-Lago, was one of the employees that he was referring to. And Trump said, and I quote, "He stole her from me." There were other things that he said in relation to this, but the tenor of it was absolutely galling. My stomach completely turned when I heard the audio. And, one of the things that I think we have to keep in mind here is that it's been very clear from the moment that the revelations about Epstein first began to be known publicly that he and his people and the men involved in the sex trafficking ring really essentially viewed these children as property and tradable things, not as human beings, obviously not as people who were being harmed and damaged and having their whole lives taken off track as a result of what they were doing. And the dehumanization of this, in particular in Trump's language, is just so profoundly disturbing, because the other thing here that we know from what he said is that it wasn't Epstein raping young girls that was the thing that had kept Donald Trump from continuing his friendship with him, because they had been friends at that point for the better part of 15 years, right? Instead, it was the idea that Epstein had taken a teenage girl who Trump felt was his property away from Trump and out of Mar-a-Lago. That actually in and of itself kind of confirms the fact that Trump viewed the girls who were working for him as belonging to him. And so much of this at this point is really about the fact that Trump, every single thing that he says about it just makes it worse. And even in the ways in which he's trying to cover, right, by claiming that, they had a falling out and Jeffrey was never welcome back again, the way in which he's trying to cover for his involvement actually belies the fact that he was a part of the same scheme. So, one of the things that I keep thinking about, and we've talked about this so much in the last few weeks, is the adverse impact to these victims over the course of their entire lives. And Virginia Giuffre, as we know, is arguably the most prominent of Epstein's victims to come forward, particularly because she alleged that she had been raped by Prince Andrew, and also that she had been passed around to various other wealthy white men over the course of her situation. I don't even want to call it involvement, because that's not what it was. Over the course of her being trafficked by Epstein and Maxwell. And we all know that she died by suicide this spring. Now, there is something that I want to say about this, because there's a new tweet apparently of hers that has resurfaced in the last 24 hours, where she said something along the lines of, "I'm not suicidal, and if anything happens to me, you should know that." Well, here's the thing I want to say about that. Okay, her family has made statements since her suicide about where she was, right, and what happened to her. And I personally think that the exploitation of victims through the use of conspiracy theories is just another layer of trash on top of what has actually been done to them by Epstein, Maxwell, and their inner circle. Okay. I will just say this. I don't think anybody should be speculating about how Virginia Epstein, about how Virginia Giuffre died. And somebody asked me about it this morning over on our Patreon feed. And I have to say that I feel like it is just piling abuse on a woman who had already experienced profound trauma. And it also shows a real lack of consideration for the trauma of child sexual assault. Okay. So, I've been very public about the fact that I am a survivor of CSA. And I'm just going to say this. Okay. No one who has not experienced it should underestimate the manner in which it impacts your mental health for life, right? And rather than speculating randomly, about whether or not something happened to her at the hands of someone else, what we really should be focused on is how the survivors can be supported so that no one else decides to commit suicide, right? That would be a much better use of our time, energy, investment, donations, everything else, okay? I find the dehumanization of these victims, even now, to be truly appalling. And I find it particularly disturbing to see it happening on our side of the fence. I talked about this a lot yesterday about the entertainment value that is being attached to this story, the way in which it's being pigeonholed as, not pigeonholed, the way in which it's being repurposed for entertainment on YouTube, the way it's being described in salacious terms, these demands that victims expose themselves to testimony in front of Congress so they can be cross-examined by Republicans. No, all of this assumes that these are not human beings, right? That these girls were not individuals with bright futures in front of them. And whether they had bright futures or not is actually kind of irrelevant, that they were human beings, right? And the ones who have survived still are, okay? We don't need to use these victims as objects, right? For purposes of taking down Trump or for purposes of creating conspiracy theories, right? Like, let's have some dignity, right? For these victims. Let's have some, they deserve their dignity. So, all of this, again, is yet another sign that this isn't going away. And I will just say, finally, this morning, Chuck Schumer has done something significant, which is that I was actually quite surprised to see this because I'm not a fan of his at this moment. He, with the backing of the 7 other senators on the Homeland Security Committee inside the Senate, Schumer has invoked a very little known, little used rule to demand the full disclosure of the Epstein files by August 15th. And it looks like this is going to stick. Again, I've talked a lot about this, about how one of the reasons why I'm I am disappointed in the Democratic Party right now is that there are all these archaic procedural mechanisms in the Senate and the House that they could be using right now to shut down the Senate when they need to stop nominations and laws. All these things that Mitch McConnell became, frankly, very good at during his time as Senate Majority Leader are also things that the Democrats could be using right now. And when he was the Minority Leader, for that matter. So to see Schumer step forward and actually do this, I think that it's a sign that the Democrats are actually, not just like the progressive Democrats who know what this issue is and the traction that it has and why we need the files released, but actually that the leadership of the party is starting to finally come to terms with the fact that this is a real issue and it's sticking. Okay. So we'll have to see what comes of that. But, seeing Schumer push back on it was extremely significant and important. Okay. Final thing that I just want to say about this. Again, the base continues to splinter over this. And it is really important that we have our eyes on this. Again, far right-wing male podcasters are trashing Trump right now. I'm not even going to talk about the white nationalists who are doing it. It's truly insane how much the folks who his base listens to have abandoned him over this cover-up. And it's anybody's guess how this impacts him and the movement and the GOP, the MAGA movement, and the GOP going down the road, okay? But there are folks who I never thought in a million years were going to leave MAGA or say a bad word about Trump, who are absolutely rabid right now about this cover up of the Epstein files. And so again, we will have to see what happens in terms of how this manifests in the electorate generally. But it's not going away. And in fact, it's getting worse. So eyes on that. Please, 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 by the way, be mindful of how you were talking about the victims, how you were talking about this issue. Let's make sure that we are really clear about the fact that, the layers of dehumanization here are real, that internalized sexism and bias plays out in the way that we talk about these things if we haven't actually done our work, and that we should be at the forefront of all of our thinking about it through the lens of political strategy, be thinking about how we protect these victims from further harm, okay? Really, really important. All right, we had a mountain of questions on the Patreon feed this morning about Emil Bove. Okay, by the way, for those who don't know, you can subscribe over at patreon.com/resistancelive for as little as $5 a month. That's less than 20 cents a broadcast, to ask me questions that I will answer in writing or on the air for 3 hours before every broadcast. And you also get access to our bonus broadcasts and other perks. So if you like what we do here, please head on over there and become a paid subscriber. Appreciate you guys. The questions about Bove were wide-ranging. So I want to take a minute to just back up here, because I want people to understand how the circuit courts of appeal work. Background information, first and foremost, was that Bove was confirmed by the Senate to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals last night by a single tie-breaking vote, okay? Collins and Murkowski did not vote in favor. There was another Republican senator who was missing in action, did not vote at all. So he slid by on the skin of his teeth. But there were people on the Patreon feed this morning, and I've seen a lot of this on social media, who were like, how can we believe anything out of the Third Circuit right now? Okay, so you need to actually have a real understanding of how the circuit courts of appeal work in order to understand the degree of his influence. And I'm not going to minimize the fact that Emil Bove is one of the most dangerous figures in the current Trump era that we have come across. Okay, we know he lied to Congress in his confirmation hearings. He is on record in documents, in emails that have been recorded by whistleblowers. And now apparently there's audio somewhere essentially telling the courts that, telling the staff of the DOJ to ignore court orders, particularly with regard to deportation and removal to CCOT. He is a bad actor, and that is the understatement of the year, right? There's other things that we know about in terms of his actions with regard to the Eric Adams prosecution and the quid pro quo that was executed upon there. And that's not even including his work as Trump's personal defense attorney in the case involving Stormy Daniels. He's a really bad guy. And that's one reason why, from the perspective of the nomination, for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks, there have been efforts to try to just absolutely defeat this nomination. And the Republicans, with their majority in the Senate, mostly clung together on this one. Every single Democrat voted against it. Okay, now let's talk about how the Circuit Court of Appeals works. The Third Circuit Court of Appeals has a bench of judges, all right? He is not the only judge on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. This is really important to understand. He is, in fact, the 23rd judge on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, okay? There are now 23 judges on the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. Every Circuit Court of Appeals inside the United States has a multitude of judges appointed to those positions, okay? I will remind you all, again, here we go. I'm going to put my former Columbia law professor hat back on again. The way in which the court system is structured on the federal level in this country is district courts at the lower level, multiple district courts from different states reporting up to the Circuit Courts of Appeal, of which there are 13, if you include the specific ones that are like the Federal Circuit Court of Appeals that governs patent and trademark and the like, and courts of appeals from states, okay? 13 Circuit Court of Appeals, those all then route to the Supreme Court at the top. Okay, let's say hypothetically that you have a case in a district court in Pennsylvania, all right? Pennsylvania district courts are in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals for purposes of jurisdiction. So you file a case in Pennsylvania, you lose that case. When you file an appeal, it's going to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals, okay? Now here's where it gets interesting. Judicial appointments to given cases are by random assignment. So what that means, and there's like, the way this has been described is like you spin the wheel, okay? Your case, you appeal your case to the Third Circuit, a briefing schedule is set, and before your oral argument, as a litigant, you find out the judges that you have pulled for the case, okay? Every single case that is appealed to a Circuit Court of Appeals is reviewed by a 3-judge panel, okay? It is not possible in our Circuit Courts of Appeal to have a single judge rule on an appeal, okay? So this is really important when you consider how Bove's authority is going to function, okay? No matter what, any case that he lands will also have 2 other circuit judges on it. Why is this important? Because sometimes cases rise or fall by a 2-to-1 majority at the circuit court level, all right? So he may, depending on the cases that get assigned to him, be on a bench with another Trump appointee or not. And because these appointments are federal appointments, essentially there are judges who stay on the bench until they're like in their 90s sometimes. They might take senior status, but he may be on a panel with a judge who was appointed by Bill Clinton, a judge who was appointed by George W. Bush, and himself, or 2 Obama appointees, or 2 Biden appointees. There's all sorts of ways in which the mix could go, all right? So he is not, in and of himself, responsible for opinions coming out of the Third Circuit. This is really important, all right? You can trust opinions out of the Third Circuit as much as you can trust opinions out of any other circuit in the country, but lawyers and legal analysts like myself are always going to look at the split on opinions and the judges who ruled on it first. Why? Because it tells us something about the lens through which they interpret the law and the Constitution, right? In some instances, we may know that certain appointees are traditionalists, that certain appointees are Federalist Society nominees, that certain appointees, particularly if they're appointed only by Donald Trump, are more likely to be ideologues, okay? All of this is very significant to evaluating the authority that Emil Bove will have. Now, people ask me questions about, can he potentially be removed? Okay, even though lifetime appointments to the federal bench are lifetime, there are means by which judges to the federal bench can be removed. One of them is impeachment. And that works very much like, exactly like, the impeachment process that we all became so familiar with during Trump's first term, okay? Articles of impeachment are filed, determinations are made whether or not the impeachment should be voted up by the House. It starts in House Judiciary, just like it does with the president, and then it gets moved over to the Senate for trial. There is historical precedent, not a lot of it, I will freely admit this, but there is historical precedent for removing federal judges from the bench through that process, okay? The other means by which things can go sour for a federal judicial nominee is through judicial ethics. Because unlike the Supreme Court, there is a mandatory code of ethics for judges on the federal bench. And if, for instance, someone makes a complaint about Bove having violated the code of ethics, there can then be a process for him to be sanctioned for doing that. Now, this is very complicated stuff. It's not invoked all that often, all right? But the thing I just want to say about this is that if we were, hypothetically, to take back the House and the Senate in 2026, impeachment proceedings could be started against Emil Bove for lying to Congress in his confirmation hearing, okay? So folks need to kind of grasp that this isn't like a permanently done deal, but it will require the right mix in Congress and the Senate, and it will also require the political will, okay? So this is something right now to table for, like, let's just say hypothetically, like January 1st of 2027. Because assuming that we are able to do the right thing in the next election, there may be a lot more room to maneuver around this, all right? So that's really what I wanted everybody to understand. I think one of the things that is critical here is that while he is a profoundly dangerous person, at the bare minimum, our circuit courts of appeal are designed so that no one judicial nominee is responsible for whether a given case rises or falls. And this will be particularly important, by the way, in the event that there are federal court challenges to, let's just say hypothetically, Pennsylvania election results. It will not be Emil Bove alone And it may not be Emil Bove at all, because the judicial assignments are random, who would be ruling on an appeal from that case. All right. So I hope that's helpful to everybody to understand it. Okay. Speaking of nominees, we had another question this morning about Alina Habba. So background, just to refresh everybody on what has happened here in the great state of New Jersey over the last few weeks. Okay. Alina Habba was the nominee to be the U.S. attorney for the District of New Jersey, and had not yet been confirmed by the U.S. Senate. As a result, under the rules concerning this, she was supposed to be on her way out. I think it was like a week and a half ago, like Friday at the end of not last week, but the week before. Using a provision of federal law, all the judges on the district court for the District of New Jersey voted to remove her at the end of that window of time. That, by the way, is totally legal. It's not a sign that they're activist judges. This is a provision of federal law that allows the judges to remove someone and not continue on as the acting U.S. attorney if they all vote to remove her. Okay, so they did. And then they nominated someone who was much more experienced to be the U.S. attorney for the District of New Jersey. And within hours, Pam Bondi removed that woman and put Alina Habba back in place. But in order to do that, they had to do something to get around the procedural requirements for how long someone who is the acting pending nominee as the U.S. attorney can last. And so what they did was they withdrew her permanent nomination to the role so that she could be reappointed as the interim for another 210 days. At the end of the 210 days, she's gone no matter what. Okay, so that's like the good news. But there is a recent development around this that is really fascinating. And I am not surprised by this one bit. Like, I actually flagged that I thought this was coming when all of this went down. A criminal litigant, so someone who is being prosecuted in the District of New Jersey by Alina Habba for a drug-related crime, alleged, has challenged, as a part of that person's prosecution, the lawyers have challenged in defending their client, her authority to prosecute anyone given what the DOJ did. So this is where, I mean, I have to say that as like a law geek, this is a fascinating question to me. Like, I'm really interested to see how this all plays out. And, you know, this is where kind of like the nuances of the law and how they're applied starts to get really interesting when you have creative lawyers who are trying to really zealously advocate for their clients. That has been raised in the context of that criminal prosecution. But obviously, how that judge rules and then what happens if that case goes up on what's called an interlocutory appeal, which is where before the prosecution or a case is complete, it's appealed to a circuit court to determine whether or not that ruling, which could make the case live or die, should be reviewed. Okay. Here, this litigant, this criminal defendant, is claiming that because she is acting outside of legal authority, that she should not be in the role, his prosecution should be dropped. And again, this is going to be a very fascinating development to watch in real time. So that's where that stands. And it's a wild trajectory. It's a really wild trajectory. I will also just say that she is like universally despised here in New Jersey. So the fact that the judges did this does not surprise me. There's kind of a lot of real upset about the prosecution of LaMonica McIver in particular, arising out of the events at Delaney Hall, where she and Newark Mayor Ross Baraka tried to exercise their legitimate oversight responsibilities to get inside an ICE detention camp. People are very, very agitated and upset about this. So how this one plays out is going to be really interesting to watch. And the other lawyers that I know here are equally fascinated with how the application of the law could play out in the context of this prosecution. Because the thing is, if this particular defendant wins, then she may stay in that role, but she will be toothless. And that's also going to be a really interesting thing for just like pending cases inside the District of New Jersey. Wild times. Okay, now that we've gone down that total legal rabbit hole, just a couple thoughts for today, okay? One thing that I just wanted to mention here that I think is really important to consider is that all of these kind of like looming events, right? We had another situation yesterday where a prosecution was dropped against a protester in LA concerning ICE who had been handing out face shields to people in the crowd, okay? Completely dropped because, you know, there was inadequate evidence. There are a series of events happening right now in the legal realm that are that are showing us the critical importance of our judiciary in their actions to protect democracy. Okay. And simultaneously, there's a lot of fear running around right now about like the disintegration of the rule of law. One of the things that I just want to say here is that upholding the actions of judges and supporting lawyers who are doing really good work is a critical part of making sure that this third branch of our government can continue to be an effective check and balance on the Trump administration. So I haven't done this in a while, but it occurred to me that today was a really good day to do it. There are phenomenal lawyers in this country every day. This particular person challenging Alina Habba's authority is one of them, who are really going above and beyond the call of duty to try to find creative ways to keep people safe and also to make sure that the rule of law can stand and that democracy is preserved. Someone asked me yesterday on the feed, particularly about where to donate money for people who are working on behalf of people who may be deported. All right. So one of the things that I want to remind everybody of is that there are legal services organizations, particularly along the southern border, that employ lawyers to do this kind of work. Okay. So RISIS is a great organization to donate to. Border Network for Human Rights is a phenomenal, I know the leaders of that from back in 2019, phenomenal organization to donate to. Okay. The National Immigration Rights Law Center should donate there. Don't forget about the ACLU, which is doing an enormous amount of immigration justice work. Okay, really critical. But also please keep in mind that, you know, the ACLU generally has its hands in many, many cases right now across the country. Mark Elias's firm is also doing great work on voting rights related issues. And, you know, if you have a little money to spread around, not all of us do these days, but if you do, please don't neglect the legal services organizations that are truly out there fighting to save people's lives. All right. I just think that at this point, I'm amazed as a former class action lawyer that class action lawyers right now are also playing a critical role in getting around the Supreme Court's ban on nationwide injunctions, because if you certify a class and the class is nationwide, then you can get an injunction. So all these creative uses of the law by really good lawyers is a thing that we desperately need right now. And so I just want to say to everybody, like, don't forget to support legal services organizations. They're just a critical part of the backbone of what the judiciary in particular is trying to do right now to push back. All right. That's it for today, my friends. I will catch you all here tomorrow live at regular time. Please don't forget to subscribe, like this broadcast, drop me a comment if you're watching after the replay, and share it with all your friends and family, okay? Also, don't forget, we have a free guide available. It's already linked in the show notes that you can download on how you can make a difference where you live, especially without burning out. I talked to a few people over the last couple of days who were like, I know I want to make a difference right now, but I'm not really sure how to do it. We also have videos about that over on our sister channel, the Ripple Effect Institute channel, that you can watch for free. But really important to not forget that, like, everyone, including lawyers, has a role to play right now in how we're pushing back against the administration, and you should get involved. All right. That's it, everybody. I will see you here tomorrow at regular time. I will see you here Friday at regular time. There will be a bonus broadcast for our Patreon subscribers on Friday afternoon. And I hope you all have a good Wednesday. All right. Take care, everybody. Bye.